Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are plunging into a stack of source material that is, well, frankly, it's dense.
It's deeply moving.
Yeah, and it operates less like a straightforward biography and more like a necessary psychological autopsy of one man, Walter Earl.
It really is a harrowing read.
Mm.
We're dealing with these searing, non-linear snapshots of a life.
And the structure of the source material is absolutely key here, isn't it?
Oh, completely. Because it doesn't just give us a timeline of tragic events. It gives us a psychological argument.
An argument.
Yeah, it argues that scarcity, trauma, violence, they aren't just things that happen to you and then, just disappear.
So what does the source suggest they are, if not just random events?
They're things you inherit. They are passed down, leaving these physical, lasting scars.
Not just emotional wounds.
No, not just emotional. Marks that dictate how you physically navigate the world and even how you construct your environment.
That idea right there, that stars become the mandate, not just the memory of the event, that's the core concept we need to hold on to as we guide you through this. I mean, when you look at Walter Earl's life, you see this devastating proof. Scarcity is not just an empty wallet. It is a perpetual physical wound that dictates every single action.
It fundamentally alters your relationship with the material world.
Exactly. And that's why the narrative is broken into these two distinct acts, right? Almost like a diptych.
Precisely. The first part is that raw, explosive, formative period of childhood. The injury and chaos.
Spanning roughly 1933 to 1942.
The period of infliction where the deep wounds were set.
And the second act.
It just leaps decades forward. All the way to 2006, when his child, who is our narrator, returns to survey the physical ruin left behind in the house.
The survey of the damage.
Yeah.
So our mission, our central task for you, the listener, is to connect that desperate, vulnerable boy from eastern Kentucky in the 1930s.
The boy who is terrified by the random chaos of his world.
To the intensely controlling, isolated, and ultimately barricaded man he became. We have to trace the wound forward.
And that connection begins with the very first physical scar. We have to start in 1933. Walter Earl is just 4 years old.
And the scene is set in this world of neglect. He's described as an unattended child, basically playing by himself, digging under the back porch steps.
Probably just trying to create some excitement, break the monotony of a childhood defined by neglect and poverty.
And what he finds isn't a toy.
No, it's a rusty coiled piece of wire, partially buried. This is the moment where chaos springs, literally out of the ground.
He mistakes it for buried treasure, right? He's pulling on it, trying to wrestle it out of the dirt.
And that tension just snaps. The coil springs loose, whipping out with incredible force.
And the detail the source gives us here is truly unforgettable.
It is. It's critical for understanding the rest of his life. It says the wire sliced through his eyeball as cleanly as a paring knife through a hard-boiled egg.
Wow. That is an image of pure, random, brutal chaos.
An unsuspecting 4-year-old child attacked by an inanimate object while just trying to play.
The physical consequence was devastating. He was blind in both eyes for months.
Right, until vision slowly returned in the undamaged eye. But the psychological takeaway here is paramount.
What's the lesson from that?
That this random injury happening while he was just playing instilled this deep foundational belief that the world is fundamentally painful, arbitrary, and dangerous.
So if he learned anything from that first scar, it's that a threat isn't just, external or predictable.
It can literally spring out of the ground at any second.
Yeah.
It's the lesson of perpetual random vulnerability.
Exactly. And that raw, visceral fear that was born in 1933, it didn't just go away.
No, it just became focused. It paved the way for the much more calculated human chaos that exploded in his family home 8 years later.
So now we shift to 1941, and the trauma that demolished his childhood home. We know the atmosphere was toxic.
It was, focused entirely on money, or really the lack thereof.
The source gives us some context on this financial rot.
It does. His father had received a significant settlement, $5,000, in what they called a balm suit.
Which was basically a lawsuit for loss of affection for his wife's infidelity.
A fortune at the time.
Yeah.
A real chance at stability, maybe even prosperity.
But his mother, Nonearl, she immediately burned through the entire sum.
So the scarcity wasn't just poverty anymore. Now it was betrayal.
And that combination of betrayal and scarcity, it leads to this final horrifying confrontation.
Walter Earl's father is drinking, and he starts violently slashing at Nonearl and the children with a specific object that becomes an essential relic of this whole story.
The Case XX knife.
That's the one. this specific, identifiable tool of the assault.
Violence just fueled by despair and terror.
And the chaos only ends because his grandfather, Granddad Joe, steps in. He's holding a .38 revolver, and he fires one shot.
The father dies an hour later. It's a moment of necessary defense, but it comes with this terrible moral price.
It does. And the truly chilling legacy here isn't the murder itself. It's the impossible inheritance that follows for 12-year-old Walter Earl.
What do you mean by that?
It is the moment that trauma is handed off as a duty. Granddad Joe makes this profoundly disturbing yet morally complex statement to the boy.
He says,
I killed him so you wouldn't have to, son.
Wow. He's framing murder not as a tragedy, but as an inherited duty of protection that has just been fulfilled on the boy's behalf.
What a burden to place on a 12-year-old.
And the transfer is immediate and material. He's forced to go to work right after, and his mother gives him 2 chilling items to carry.
She hands him the murder weapon, the pistol.
And the assault weapon, that very same case, double-X knife.
So he literally carries the tools that both destroyed and saved his family. That knife becomes this constant, tangible weight in his pocket. A physical reminder.
It's a weapon, but also a history lesson he's forced to live with every single minute.
He carries his trauma as a weapon.
Yes, and that forces us into the definitive psychological pivot just 1 year later, summer of 1942. Walter Earl is now 13, the oldest boy, and the undeniable provider for a family that is, well, it's utterly destitute.
He takes this brutal, back-breaking job in the railroad yard with the Reefer gang.
Hauling massive 300-pound blocks of ice into insulated rail cars.
He's nicknamed Frosty. And he's making 50 cents a day, $3 for 6 days of relentless, punishing labor, all driven by what Source calls absolute starvation.
And the bitter irony here is just agonizing. He is spending all his physical strength cooling rich people's luxury food.
Bananas, oranges, peaches, things his family couldn't even dream of affording.
And the heartbreak is in the details of his own home life. His mother, Nonearl, refused to plant a garden because she thought she was too citified for farm work.
So the family relied entirely on him, even as his siblings suffered.
His own sisters were so desperate they were sneaking out to pull grass from the side yard to cook up for supper.
That detail, pulling grass to eat, that hits harder than any account of financial loss.
It really does. That is the true face of scarcity. And the shame he was forced to witness every day, he had to force himself not to look at their swollen, hungry bellies.
So the abundance he handled daily was just an agonizing form of torture. And his desperation was not private, it was a commodity.
The ice boss, Cappy, hired him specifically because he knew the family was completely ruined after the murder.
Exactly, guaranteeing him a compliant, exploited worker who couldn't afford to complain or quit.
So after 6 days of this grueling labor, he gets that first $3, survival money.
And he buys the most symbolic taste of forbidden wealth he can find, the very item he'd been cooling all week.
A number 2.5 can of Del Monte cling peaches.
He's exhausted, standing there with the physical weight of his entire family on his shoulders, and the top man on the gang gives him half a pint of harsh whiskey.
A twisted initiation ritual.
Yeah. And Walter Earl immediately opens the can with the one constant thing in his pocket, that relic of his family's violence.
The case double-X knife, which the source describes so tragically as a spear he uses to stab the fruit.
He just gorges himself, frantically. It's not eating. It's an act of completely uncontrolled animalistic consumption after a lifetime of want.
He's swallowing fruit flies, drinking the thick syrup. He's trying to consume all the abundance he had been denied in one single desperate moment.
But his body, starved and shocked by the heavy sugar and harsh whiskey, immediately rejects it.
It causes a violent, uncontrollable eruption. He vomits the entire contents, all the symbolic wealth, all that hard-earned quarters worth of food against a wall.
Total humiliation. The gang mocks him, and the cruel nickname Peaches sticks forever.
He's been exploited, starved, witnessed violence, and now he's publicly shamed by his own body's failing to simply hold down this tiny victory.
This is chaos fully realized.
And this should have been the moment he collapsed. This is the definition of rock bottom. But what he does next, this is the definitive, transformative act of his entire life.
This is the moment the boy makes the choice that dictates his future.
He spits out the sludge, walks back to the market. It must have been agonizing.
And he buys a second can.
Yes. And he gives himself that unforgettable internal command, the one he will live by for the next 5 decades.
I was never going to throw up a quarter's worth of food again.
That is the pivotal shift. The first pan represented the chaos of the external world, random injuries, sudden violence, starvation, humiliating rejection.
And the second can represents the birth of the iron fist of self-discipline he will use to manage the world for the rest of his life.
He eats that second can slowly, deliberately. He reclaims power over his body, over the humiliation.
The scar of that day isn't just external. It's internalized as a lifetime mandate.
Control everything, your consumption, your emotions, your environment, or be destroyed by chaos again.
And that realization, the boy who learned to suppress chaos through unyielding internal control, is what we carry as we make this massive jump forward in time.
Because that control mandate defined his adult life, right? It manifested as deep isolation and suspicion.
He built a mental and emotional fortress long before he built a physical one.
So we transition now. From that deep internal psychological forging to the massive physical manifestation of it decades later.
The narrator, Walter Earl's child, returns in 2006. That's 24 years after his death, to clean out his room.
And the room itself is the perfect physical evidence of a life defined by that original trauma.
And the resultant mandate for rigid control. The very first thing the narrator notices is the sensory shock.
The smell. A sickening odor. Old, acrid, harsh, and mixed with vomit.
It's a sickening echo, isn't it? The air itself carries the memory of the 1942 Peaches scene. The rejection, the bitterness, the shame.
Still lingering right there, decades later, the physical space is still echoing the humiliation of the boy.
And the clutter is overwhelming. We aren't talking about messy. We're talking about chaos that requires a bulldozer.
The estimate is 1,700 cubic feet of junk.
5 televisions, 3 broken air conditioners, furniture missing legs.
This extreme hoarding, it reflects that deep mistrust born from scarcity.
It's the physical manifestation of that 1942 internal rule. The fear that if you ever threw something away, the world would never, ever provide a replacement.
It's a physical monument to his fear of lack.
And everywhere, you see these mended vulnerabilities. A broken window is patched with cardboard, then layers of saran wrap and duct tape.
A tragic, lifelong, almost frenetic attempt to shield his fragile environment from the outside world.
The world he believed was constantly trying to injure him, just like that coiled wire.
And it wasn't just random mess, it was the construction of a defense.
It was referred to as a Great Wall, a bizarre Daley-esque fence made of umbrella stands and shoeboxes blocking access to parts of the house.
But the detail about the basement door is the most profound insight into his isolation.
The door was secured by a fortress of fasteners, multiple latches, screen door hooks, eyes.
And here's the crucial realization the narrator has when looking at the way they were installed.
Those locks were clearly not put in place to keep intruders out.
Wait, so he was building a physical defense not against the world outside, the random chaos, but against his own family inside the house.
Precisely. They were installed to keep people inside the house from moving through it. They were barriers against his own family, barricading himself in his controlled space.
The absolute definition of isolation driven by fear.
And amid all that physical chaos, the narrator finds these specific relics of the conflict, objects that still carry the charge of the past.
Like handmade pajama bottoms made by Nonearl.
Still serving as a silent criticism of the narrator's own mother, Della. The intergenerational friction continues, passing through the objects themselves.
But the anchor of the 1933 trauma is the central relic.
The blue glass eye.
It sits on the dresser, surrounded by tools, and the source notes, pointedly, it does not blink.
It is the permanent physical manifestation of that original vulnerability, the unblinking truth of his life. A piece of glass that sits there as a constant reminder that the world ripped his body open when he was 4 years old and he never trusted it again.
So we've traced this entire terrible loop, from the coiled wire that taught him random chaos,
Through the case XX knife that symbolized necessary murder and inherited duty.
to the can of peaches that forced him into rigid internal control.
And finally, to the neglectful house of barricades that housed his isolation.
And the object that carries the most weight for the narrator is that blue glass eye. The final image is of the narrator holding it.
Feeling it cool in my hand like a worry stone with a hole already rubbed in.
The physical evidence of inherited trauma has been transferred. Walter Earl is gone, but the scar is now fully the narrator's burden to carry.
And that's the point we're left with for you, the listener.
The source ends with the narrator's final, heavy, and unanswerable question. Holding this fragile piece of history, what the hell do I do with this?
And this deep dive really forces us to consider the emotional patterns, the control mechanisms, and critically, the material objects that we've inherited from the generations before us.
What physical evidence of trauma, anxiety, or unfulfilled scarcity do you still carry?
Because the cleanout process continues long after the house is sold.
We may not have a literal blue glass eye, but we all carry some material or emotional relic of the chaos that shaped our parents or grandparents.
And understanding the source of those scars. Knowing why that man built that wall or why he refused to throw anything away. That is the first essential step toward finally being able to process them. You must first understand why the relic exists before you can decide whether or not to discard it.